This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca, home of New York's craft cider. I love New York. Plan your getaway at visitithaca.com.
Welcome to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt, a man on a never-ending search for the perfect pizza. This show is the audio version of the Pizza Talk YouTube series, where I engage in interesting conversations with some of the country's greatest pizza makers and other artisans. Thanks for joining me on this quest. Welcome to Pizza Talk, and unique day today because we're excited to announce with its very creator the launch of the new Modernist pizza book. Nathan Myhrvold, thank you for joining us today. And where are you coming to us from? Are you all the way back there on the West Coast? Or are you somewhere out on the road?
I'm in Bellevue, Washington at the moment.
Bellevue. Looks like a laboratory behind you.
This is my laboratory office where I took some of the pictures of the book and where I hang out in between tasting pizza and making it.
Well, it's been a long time in coming. We've been hearing about it for a while. I've got my an example of one of the covers here, and we'll talk about it. We're going to talk a lot about this. Really, it's almost like all you could possibly want to know about pizza and more. 3-volume, actually 4-volume encyclopedia, so to speak, of pizza. Which all the Modernist books are really, I could say, encyclopedic in scope and unique in the publishing industry. And I want to hear about how we got to pizza, because we started out with Modernist cuisine, went through Modernist bread, now we're at Modernist pizza. But I just want to backtrack for people who don't know you and don't know about you. I mean, I first learned about you many years ago. I think when I first met you, I told you I read this article. I think it was a profile in the New Yorker about this guy who worked at Microsoft. I don't know what year it came out. It must have been 20 years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And when I read the article, I went, oh my God, this is like the whisperer at Microsoft. He's the guy that was always thinking 5 years ahead and stuff like that. But even that was only just part of your journey. Can you talk a little bit about this path you've been on that took you from the world of science and intellectual pursuit to the deep dive into food?
Well, it's a path that has lots of twists and turns, and many of them make sense only to me and maybe not even to me. But as a kid, I loved math and science, but I also loved cooking. And when I was 9 years old, I made Thanksgiving dinner all by myself. And then on, I was like the family cook. While I was at Microsoft, I became a physicist. And I worked closely with Stephen Hawking. And we were working on quantum theories of the universe and where space and time came from.
Wow. I mean, what was that like, working with essentially the guy who was taking us into new frontiers?
Well, Stephen was a great guy to work with, but it was very hard to feel sorry for yourself if you worked for Stephen, because even if you're having a terrible day, before you can feel too sorry for yourself, you think, well, here's this man who has just crushing physical challenges with his condition. He had ALS, which is a horribly debilitating disease. And yet he had a great sense of humor. He loved to tell jokes. He would even sometimes say his condition was an advantage that helped him.
Wow.
In part, he said, because he didn't have to go to committee meetings at the university, but also because he said it made him simplify all of the ideas down to just a very small number that he could keep in his head. So anyway, after that, I sort of accidentally got into software and started a software company that Microsoft acquired. And I started working for Bill Gates and became the first chief technology officer at Microsoft.
So you had your own company first, but how did you go from working with this physicist and weren't you also didn't you also study things like paleontology? Weren't you becoming like a dinosaur expert and all
Well,
that?
I also do research in dinosaurs and asteroids and a whole bunch of other different topics.
So all this time you're like amassing all these different skills and talents and degrees, and are you still asking yourself, what do I want to do when I grow up?
Well, I've kind of given up on the growing up part. Certainly, aging is affecting me, so it's not like age is not an issue, but I have yet to settle down to a single thing, and I don't think I will at this stage. Anyway, after working at Microsoft for many years, I decided I wanted to learn more about cooking. I got Bill to give me a leave of absence, and I went to chef school in France. And then after that, I wound up retiring from Microsoft, and I had hoped I could learn about modern cooking techniques, that there'd be some big book I could buy. And there are big books about Italian food or Japanese food or French food, but most of them didn't cover, at the time, the very most recent culinary techniques.
Yeah.
They would cover techniques up through, say, Nouvelle Cuisine period of France or New American food. The other thing is that the two different threads of my life had been quite separate, but people like Harold McGee started writing books in the 80s about the science of cooking and how you could apply science to lots of cooking things. And in fact, that a lot of things everybody knew in cooking were wrong. That science could easily show that the stories that chefs told themselves and each other often were not really correct. So it makes a difference. So anyway, I looked to buy the big book of Science of Cooking, and when I couldn't find it, I wound up writing it.
There you go. It's kind of like these two paths are all of a sudden converging.
Yep.
And bringing your two and almost separate worlds together into one path. And along the way, you also started a company that invests in other really bright people.
I continue to do tech and scientific things on the side. My company, Intellectual Ventures, invents things, and we invest in people's inventions. I've got almost 1,000 patents myself.
Amazing. I remember when I visited, Modernist Cuisine, seeing this room with a whole bunch of mosquitoes flying around it. And that was one of the first things I heard about Intellectual Ventures, was that you were attempting to find basically a way to wipe out malaria. I believe this wasn't that a malaria project.
We have done a lot of anti-malaria projects, and that included novel ways of killing mosquitoes. The coolest of which was a system that would spot mosquitoes in the air and shoot them down with lasers.
Yeah.
What else can you say?
Well, we're waiting for Captain Kirk to show up and taking you deep into unknown territories, because it's like almost going to a Modernist Cuisine was like being at Willy Wonka land. You had all this amazing equipment behind you that's not cooking equipment per se, but then there's a kitchen behind that, and then you have a team of people who are just constantly pushing the envelope of what happens when you ask questions like why, what happens when you do this, or what's not true. What are some of the great myths that you've busted that are out there in sort of the the culinary world that people.
Well, there's tons of them. To pick bread, an area that is near and dear to both of us, kneading doesn't do what most books say it does, kneading or mixing. In fact, the thing that makes the gluten develop isn't the mechanical work. It's simply the flour getting wet. And the mechanical work helps the flour get wet evenly. It helps speed it up. But another one is for rye bread. The reason that we don't have nice fluffy rye breads in the United States is that we have the wrong flour. We have terrible flour in the United States. First of all, the fluffiness of rye bread depends directly on the particle size of the flour. The smaller the particle, the fluffier the rye bread.
Okay.
And then you also want to have a special strain of rye that is grown for bread. Well, it turns out we don't grow those in North America. North America grows rye primarily for animal feed. And then some of that is diverted to make flour. And the flour is usually super coarse.
So can that flour, if it is finely ground, make decent bread? Or is that why we mix so much wheat into that flour to make it work for bread?
Typically what we do to get a fluffy rye bread in the US is we make a wheat bread and we flavor it with a little bit of rye.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's typically 10% to 30% rye flour.
Yeah.
And above that, it kills the volume and it's not fluffy anymore. But if you have the right variety of rye and the right flour, you can make a fluffy rye bread that's 100%.
And is that what they do in like Germany, places like that?
Germany and Austria.
They have a different rye than we do. But we don't have people here who want to grow that rye?
It's the weirdest thing. Okay, now, if I was talking about, I don't know, millet bread from Tibet, then you might say, okay, fine, the US doesn't have great millet. I'm just making this up.
Right.
But my God, Germany and Austria?
Yeah.
There's millions of Americans that have German or Austrian heritage. You do, I do.
Exactly.
There's millions of Americans that have lived in Germany or Austria, and there's millions of them that have lived here.
Right, right.
You'd think somewhere along the line, someone would have mentioned, oh, by the way, you guys are doing your rye breads all wrong.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that until you brought it to our attention. You know?
Yeah, and nobody had. We didn't find anybody in the US bread community that knew this. And frankly, the people in Germany and Austria weren't really aware of it either. They were aware there was a difference, but they didn't really know why. Mm-hmm. And eventually we pieced it together and figured it out. And it had originally been figured out by grain scientists in Germany, and they had helped both select strains of rye that make better bread and tell everybody they had to grind it thinner or finer.
Yeah.
And so now if you take American rye, even though it's not the right variety, and you mill it yourself, and you keep baking loaves, the finer you grind it, the fluffier the loaf. It's just the damnedest thing.
But you know, there's an interest in rye bread now in the States. And with all the other interesting grains, the heirloom grains and the land race grains and the regionally specific.
You sure think someone would do this, and I sure hope they do.
You haven't seen it yet, huh? You haven't heard of anybody saying, hey, Nathan, we're doing it. You know?
No, we called every artisanal mill that made rye flour. And every time we talked to them, they would say, well, nobody's asked for this. We make what people ask for. And then we'd say, well, what are your test results on rye? Because as you know, a miller will test the grain and they'll have lots of different metrics of that grain. And my favorite response was a very highly thought of artisanal mill and the guy said, well, it's rye. Why would we test it?
Is it just because he didn't think there's a market for it? Is that the main reason why?
Well, they weren't aware that there were tests that made a difference for rye. I mean, it was just completely, they didn't think it was even relevant. So it's an example of something that was right out in plain view. Say this wasn't like we found the secret valley of Shangri-La where people knew how to do this.
Right.
You know, you can't drive on the street without seeing a car from Germany.
It just seems so inevitable.
How come we didn't figure this out?
you know that somebody's going to, if you're watching right now, you heard it first here that we need to get the strain. Do you happen to know even the name of the strain of rye or the type?
Oh yeah, it's all in the book.
Okay, that's in the Modernist Bread book.
Yeah,
all that information. So and given that everything else under the sun has come out and is being tested and tried and marketed, it's only in a matter of time that somebody's going to come and say, "I've got the right rye, and we're gonna change the rye landscape here in America."
Yeah. Now there is one white rye flour that works moderately well. It's made by Bob's Red Mill. So we called them up and we said, "Hey, you've got the best one of the things," and they said, "Really?"
Yeah.
I mean, it was funny. Even the people that were doing the closest approximation didn't have any clue that they were.
And that's maybe because and that leads me to the next question, which is, when you start to bring science into the equation, which basically is being paralleled right now in society, is when science meets with the road of reality, you get pushback. You get people who go, "Wow, that's great to hear," and other people that go, "I'm really entrenched in my belief system, and I'm not going to fight you on that." Did you get a lot of pushback let's say, for both the cuisine book and the bread book regarding some of the things that you brought forth?
Oh, absolutely. There are things that a good example is in savory cuisine. There's a technique called confit, which originally comes from duck confit, which is where you cook duck legs or thighs very slowly overnight in liquid duck fat.
Mm-hmm. And it tastes really good.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah. Well, basically, I was thinking about this and I thought, there's no way that those fat molecules can actually penetrate the meat.
Mm-hmm.
The molecules are too large. They can't do it. So if you cook the same meat with a steamer or with anything else for the same time at the same temperature, and then sprinkled oil or fat on it, it would have to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we did experiments, and sure enough, there's no way you can tell the difference between sous vide or steamed or braised. Temperature matters, time matters, but not the cooking in fat.
It wasn't the fat that was the difference maker, despite the fact that the people who are in love with this technique are going to hold on to it being.
And so then one French chef says, "I do not believe this."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, it's not a belief. It's a proposition you can test."
Mm-hmm.
And so you test it and you see if you can taste a difference. And so you find that in cuisine. The world of bread is full of such things.
Yeah.
You have people that say, "Oh, you can't make good bread with tap water because of the chlorine."
Mm-hmm.
Well, we thought, let's try it. So we tried making bread with distilled water, with deionized water, softened water, tap water, and then finally water from my swimming pool, which has like 100 times the amount of chlorine.
Oh my gosh!
As
right. As any spring.
To test that, we had these flasks, and we'd mix the same amount of flour, water, and yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Mix them in the flasks. Then put a balloon over the top. So if the balloon puffs up, that means the yeast is making CO2. Mm-hmm. They all puffed up. Yeast didn't care. You could make bread with swimming pool water. Now, yeah. I don't suggest that you do. It tastes awful. But if you're worried about will the yeast grow, and the yeast is strong, the yeast doesn't give a shit.
Yeah. So I know that it's really hard when people are invested in a method or a technique that was a difference maker for them in their own journey. That to have somebody come in and challenge that and say, okay, yeah, maybe it works for you, but it's not. That's not the difference.
Yeah.
It's something else. I think I remember when you're doing the book, there were things about challenges that you were making to whether it was pre-ferments or steam, or I mean all the things that bakers hold near and dear to themselves that were, I would call them myth busting sort of moments.
Yeah. Well, it turns out there were a lot of myths to bust. And some of them are things that really matter in the sense that they could streamline the way you make something. That's like this confit example. You don't have to have big cauldrons full of rendered duck fat to
Yeah.
make confit. That's a great convenience, a great cleanup, great everything.
Right.
There's other things that are more of a curiosity-driven thing. When I was a kid, I remember reading, the first place I read this was in Julia Child's cookbook. She had an elaborate recipe for a baguette. And she said the secret of baguettes is that you need to have steam in the oven at the beginning of the bake.
Uh-huh.
Now, I was probably 10 years old at the time I read that initially. And I'm like, wait, how could steam make something crispy? Should make it soggy, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, of course, many years go by. We're working on the bread book, and I say, hey, let's discuss exactly why steam makes a crust crispy.
Mhm.
And we looked it up, and it turned out there was no agreement. There were two dominant theories. And so far as we could tell, although they both had a little bit right about them, they also were both wrong. They kind of, at least one of them had to be wrong because they were contradictory.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we did tons of experiments. We eventually figured out why it works. And amusingly, the key to figuring out why it works was bagels and bao.
Mm-hmm.
So bagels, of course, you steam before you bake them.
Yeah.
So if steam always made something crispy, how come bagels are not crispy?
Yeah, they're chewy. Yeah.
Never describe a bagel as crispy. I would say it's chewy.
Right. Exactly.
Well, of course, a bao is steamed all the way, right? It's the entire cooking, baking of a Chinese bao is done on the steam.
The little soft buns. Yeah.
And it turns out that the skin on them is strong enough that you can peel them like an orange and actually pull the whole skin off in one piece. And that's what led us to do some tests on the skin. And basically what the reason you have a crispy crust on a baguette is that you first form a skin. And that skin is similar to the skin on bao or bagels, but it's much thinner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then you wind up baking it crisp.
So it's kind of like the skin on a chicken or something. You want that the crisp up, but it doesn't happen from that first few minutes.
The reason that it reads to our bite as crispy is because it's fragile and thin. So as you know, with a baguette, you slash it, right? Mm-hmm. And those are called the grigna, or ears.
Yes.
Well, if you, next time you have a baguette, cut carefully through, and you'll see that the crust is way thicker in those rough parts.
Mm.
The thicker appears to us as crunchy, not crispy.
Yeah.
And so what's important is you have steam at the beginning of the bake, but not for too long. Mm-hmm. If it's too long, it makes a very thick crust, and it winds up being more like a bagel.
The bagel, yeah. So basically, it's a two-part process. It's first to create the skin, then you got to crisp the skin.
Correct.
And that's the sort of the missing conceptual step there.
That's right. And with the bagel, it's the you leave it in long enough that
Yeah.
the skin is too thick to crisp, and so you get a chewy, leathery kind of a skin instead.
Totally different product. By the way, I'm sure you've been tracking that the bagels seem to be having another moment right now.
Yes.
There's a big emerging artisan bagel movement happening, and in fact, I'm going to visit in 2 weeks one of the guys that's leading the charge in Philadelphia. Philip Korshak has a place called Korshak's Bagels. The lines are around the block for this guy. He's sold out by 12 noon every day. And
that's great.
And he's doing a sourdough bagel that he's thrown his heart and soul. And here's the link to what we're talking about today is he started out as a pizza maker. And he transitioned from pizza to. So what are some of the myths the myths that you busted in the Modernist Pizza book that just came out that might surprise people? What are some things that would be surprising?
Well, there's almost everywhere you look in pizza, there's mythology. There's mythology about the water, that you need the water of Naples, or even more amusing to an Italian, the water of New York City.
Right.
I was just reading a thing about a pizzeria last week where they were proudly proclaiming that they didn't use New York City water, but they set their tap to the same temperature as New York City water.
Right.
Well, as you know from making bread, whenever you make bread, depending on the incoming temperature and how intensively you mix it, you get a dough temperature out at the end. But it doesn't make a different bread unless you really kill it.
Right. And even now there's these elaborate systems that will change the pH and the mineral content of your order to match New York City or match Naples or match Chicago.
Look, if your water is bad tasting, it's pretty straightforward to say, why would I put bad tasting water into my pizza? So of course, if you have water that has an off taste to it, or it's super mineralized, so it feels slimy and kind of tastes soapy. Don't use that for cooking, for God's sake. Use something that tastes good. But once you have water that tastes good, that is not the difference.
So the pizzas of New York are not great because they're New York water pizzas. If they're great at all, there's something else that the pizza makers.
Well, and that brings us to our next thing, which is old famous pizzerias are usually lousy.
And I know that's another one. Like you're going to get some pushback from some people on that, but on the other hand,
there's a huge difference. You just mentioned a guy in Philadelphia who is your words, threw his heart and soul into making bagels.
Right.
Now, the way to get a great product is to find the pizzolo, the man or woman who has thrown their heart and soul into making something great.
Yes.
And if instead you say, well, yes, that person existed 70 years ago, and now their grandkids are running the place, that's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of care that it takes is very, very high. And so what we found is, whether it's in Italy or it's in the United States, if you go to the old famous places where you don't know the name of the pizzolo, you're probably screwed.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to the place where the founder is there every day and watching the oven like a hawk and watching everything else, that's how you get quality.
Or has found some way to transmit that passion and love to the next generation and to the people that keep the flame.
It's not, I don't want to say it's impossible for it to go to the next generation, of course. In Italy, you sometimes get this weird thing where because it's cool to say that all your recipes came from mom or from grandma, people will say that. And this one pizzolo, he brought out this pizza to me and he said it was all just as his grandma made it. And I just laughed at him. And he looks at me like he's going to be insulted. And I said, the pizza is perfectly round. It was perfectly stretched. I said, so unless grandma was a perfect pizzolo.
Yeah.
I don't believe a word of it.
Right.
And then he says, well, yeah, okay.
But there is that emotional connection that people have to their food that can sometimes either whether it imbues actual flavor to the food, it imbues passion and connectedness from the person who's making it that might cause them to put more love into their work.
Oh, sure, you can do that, but usually in Italy, not always, but usually they go a little bit overboard, and they'll say all my recipes, all my stuff. I wish I was as good. And then the Italian chefs that are friends of mine, when I say that, I say, God, isn't it a shame when talent skips a generation? I'm like, whoa.
Right.
And the reason here's the part that's bad about that, which is it encourages an idea that there's no innovation. It encourages the notion that, all the good shit happened 50, 100 years ago, and we're just trying to eke our way back up to that. And it's not true for bread.
Yes.
And it's not true for pizza. Yes. Either one.
I think you said it in Modernist Bread, and I've said it in my books and in many conversations, that the bread that we're eating today is probably some of the best bread that's ever been made in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
And I think the same is true about pizza today, don't you?
We're eating the best pizza. Now, if you say, does that mean every pizza is great? No. And just like every loaf of bread is not great.
Right.
But what we have today is in the case of bread, we have this dichotomy between mass-produced industrial bread, which is cheaper than ever before in history.
Right.
Which is something. Okay. Yes. And unfortunately, that bread was created and honed with price as just about its only metric. And if you say, I want cheap to the exclusion of all else, well, then you get cheap, but it may not be very good. Okay, but the artisanal breads we have today are better than anything people had in the past. Absolutely, they are.
And I think, it's funny, just ironically today, I received in the mail right before we went on air, I pulled my mail, and I get this card from Domino's Pizza saying, join our team. And I'm thinking, okay, so Domino's, in a way, we are the largest producer of pizza in the world, blah, blah, blah. You can make a whole lot of money, et cetera. And this represents a category of pizza that really dominates the marketplace with a couple of other companies. Between three companies, they probably sell 80% of the pizza. And then I got, your Modernist Pizza in front of me, and I open it up and I see this wonderful page of what you call the Frico slice. I love this slice, and how to and which basically tells people how to do something that they might not have ever thought was possible to do with a slice of pizza, to bring in sort of the qualities of crisp and everything else when they read a slice of yesterday's pizza. So you talk about innovation, and that's what I really want to get to is that what have been some of the innovations that are moving the dial forward and are separating, I don't want to say the wheat from the chaff, but the mass-produced versus these special memorable pizzas.
I mean, all around the world, we have found great committed people who have thrown their heart and soul into making pizza. We caught some grief for saying that Portland was the single best city for this.
Not for me. I agree with you.
But it's actually been hard. If you talk to Chris Bianco, who's one of the great pizzolos in the United States, really championed the artisan pizza movement. He's in Phoenix. But he's from New York.
Right.
But I asked Chris, I said, would you have been able to do what you did if you'd stayed in New York? He says, absolutely not.
Interesting.
He said, if I had stayed in New York, I'd have all these people demanding the regular things and demanding them at the regular prices.
They'd be the way they always were, yeah.
And like one of his special pizzas, the Rosa, has pistachios and red onions as its main ingredients.
Yeah.
Now, nobody back in the neighborhood
That wouldn't have flown on.
No, it wouldn't have.
No, yeah, I hear you. We'll be right back with more Pizza Quest right after this break.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca, helping you to plan your next getaway. Ithaca has waterfalls and wineries, art and theater, outdoor recreation, and family fun. The area is famous for its glacier-carved gorges, co-op-run businesses, and cultural influences from Cornell University and Ithaca College. Plus, you can't beat the beauty of Cayuga Lake, the largest of the Finger Lakes. Beyond 150 waterfalls and some of the region's best hiking trails, Ithaca is cider. The area is well known for its local cideries, which are leading the way in America's cider revival. You can hear from the region's cider makers directly on HRN series Hardcore. There's something really special about Ithaca's climate for cultivating delicious apples steeped in history and terroir. Let Visit Ithaca help you plan your next trip to this hub of food, drink, culture, and agritourism. Home of New York's craft cider, I love New York. Get started at visitithaca.com.
Welcome back to Pizza Talk, and I'm here with Nathan Myhrvold. The time's going by really fast. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I know you don't have hours to share with us. So I really appreciate the time that you're giving, us to talk about this. But and we are here to talk about the launch of a book that I remember when you were working on Modernist Bread. When you were working on Modernist Bread, I remember you were already, going after pizza in a big way,
Yep.
And so how did that happen? How did the transition happen? How did you decide this is going to be our next big one?
Well, we did a chapter on pizza in Modernist Bread. And in the process of doing that, we realized both how popular a food it was and also how full of its own weird superstitions it was. And so we thought, well, hey, here's an opportunity for us. It's the world's most popular sort of imported cuisine. People in Naples eat pizza, of course, they always have, or at least back to the 19th century they have. But if you look at the dish that is imported to the most countries in the world and is eaten the most times, I'm certain it's pizza.
And even if they don't call it pizza, something like pizza under a different name. By the way, I want to point out to our viewers, because some people are watching this, on the video version, and some are hearing it on the audio version. So if you're listening to the podcast, you're not seeing this photo that I'm holding up, but this is one of the covers, and it's one of the things that all the Modernist books are noted for is this spectacular photography, which is almost molecular in its own right. It takes you so deep into these things. And I'm holding up a photo of sort of that suspended animation or the gravity-defying, layers of a pizza in its various forms. Really cool stuff. You must be having a lot of fun shooting the photos for these books.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, in that case, when we were doing Modernist Cuisine, there was I had remembered that as a kid, I worked on my mom's car. And if you got a children's repair manual, which was this thing that would tell you how to take the car apart and put it back together, for something like a part like the carburetor, it would have an exploded diagram. And the exploded diagram would show all of the parts floating in space and would show you in one picture how it all went together.
Interesting.
So we started doing that for sandwiches in Modernist Cuisine, which we had a few of. And then I thought, hey, this is the perfect way to show all the things that go into a pizza in one picture. So we have the dough, the rolled out crust.
Yeah.
We have the sauce and toppings as different layers floating as if they're all about to collapse and land together. And then at the very bottom, we have the finished pizza.
Well, I know that there's a lot you can do with photography, but to make things happen like this. But obviously, this can't be just from one single shot.
It well, we've got a couple different ways of doing it. It is possible to do it from a single shot, but often it takes multiple takes.
So who would have thought that the modernist books can trace their heritage back to like Mechanics Illustrated and
absolutely. Well, I went on a little mission to try to figure out who invented the exploded diagram.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure, but there are some of the mechanisms that Leonardo da Vinci drew in his notebooks, his crazy machines, have something very similar to an exploded diagram.
Interesting. So now we can take it all the way back to Leonardo, and now everybody loves you, right? Oh yes, he's one of ours. And before we get to photography, because you do seem to love taking photos of all different types, you now have like 4 galleries of that display and sell wall size paintings.
Originally, I took pictures for the books, both to in a didactic way to teach people things, but also to make them beautiful. But then we got enough requests for people buying the pictures that I currently have 4 galleries in Las Vegas, New Orleans, La Jolla, and Seattle. And there we just sell pictures, typically pictures from the books.
I know, and I've been to the one in Vegas, and it's pretty spectacular. I mean, it's wall art you've created, and even one of the books that Modernist has published is just a whole book of the photography from Modernist cuisine. Yep. So it is, it is its own art form. Which again, coming back to pizza is kind of full circle. The foreword, or one of the I guess it's the foreword statement in the new book, is written by Tony Gemignani, one of our favorite pizzaiolos and sort of a rock star in the pizza world. And one of the things that we love about Tony is this, his catchphrase is "respect the craft," and he's printed it on every box, and he's taken this notion of passion to exemplify what it is about him and the kind of people he's looking for to train for the next generation.
And I really think that's important. One of the advantages, frankly, that Italy has, particularly Campania, is that being a pizzolo is a profession there. It's a respected thing. Whereas most chain pizzerias in the US, because they're going for price, it's a job for young people for only a certain phase of their career, typically, and typically it pays minimum wage.
Yeah.
The other thing that I love about Tony's respect the craft thing is, if you're a little pizzeria, that's your best chance to shine, is to do a great job.
Yeah,
because it's really hard to beat these chain guys at making $5 or $10 pizzas. Sorry, that's super hard to do.
Yeah.
Whereas making a great pizza that people are more than willing to spend a little bit more money for, that's something you really can do as an individual that these big companies haven't managed.
And we've seen this same sort of pattern in a number of areas of the food craft, whether it was with bread, it happened with the artisan bread movement, it's happening in the craft beer movement, the cheese movement. It's a very similar pattern. And it's almost like the reinvention of the craft that existed before industrialization. And it's a way back in, to that level.
I like to use coffee and chocolate. When I was a kid, coffee meant U-Ban or Folgers. Those are the brands Mom bought in a can at the grocery store. And chocolate was mostly Hershey's. Well, today you can still get Hershey's and U-Ban and Folgers, but it's a so much nicer world, or at least you have the choice to go get an artisanal chocolate bar or a fantastic latte that's made with a very specific coffee from a very specific slope. And it's those things that really connect great producers directly with the customer that is the hallmark of that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and the people who figured it out first were the wine folks.
Yeah. That's true.
That you know, that great wineries in France had already been identified hundreds of years ago. Not to say there aren't new great ones, but the challenge with something like pizza that's a fresh food that should be eaten quickly is that a pizzeria has to find its audience. But you know, I think hewing towards quality is the answer. That's what we found in this. You know, I should say one of the things that's different about this book than our other books is we thought it was essential that we travel the world and visit pizzerias. So we went to nearly 300 pizzerias around the world, intensively tasted and photographed what they did, interviewed them and have them tell us as much or as little as they wanted. Interestingly, almost everyone was entirely open and told us everything.
Good.
The few pizzerias that didn't tell us very much, it's funny, there was this very persistent effect that they usually also weren't very good.
Yeah.
And I tell my people, I'd say, we don't need to learn how to do this.
All right. If he doesn't want to tell us how he screwed it up, we won't.
But it's the reason we had to do that is that pizza hasn't been a cuisine that people write about. You know, probably every 3-star Michelin chef in the world and lots of 1- and 2-star chefs have a cookbook. Most pizzerias don't have a cookbook.
Yeah.
It's actually very rare for a pizzeria to have a cookbook. And so instead, you know, it relies on somebody like you that's written a great book. And of course, there are some, you know, Dan Richter of Raza, a great pizzeria in Jersey City, has written a book, and Mark Vetri wrote a book, and there's a number that are written by them. But for every great pizzolo that's written a book, there's probably 10 more that haven't.
Well, that's it, and they're starting to pop. It's a new phenomenon of, you know, books that
it is a new phenomenon, and it's part of this notion of making a pizzola be something that has some respect to it. Right? That it's very hard to recruit good people to a profession if you also don't respect that profession. Yeah. And I think a lot of the quality improvement we've had in American food, both in American style food as well as just other food in America, is we started respecting chefs. And so when you respect chefs and you have celebrity chefs and you have that whole phenomenon, it trickles down to something that encourages people to go into that field rather than say, no, I'm going to go be an ophthalmologist or an investment banker or some other thing that a talented person could do. Yeah. It has cachet now, and it's earned respect from the public. The American public didn't ever bring that opportunity to the chef community until more recent times, and now it's kind of worked its way into the pizza community, which it's like you say, well, of course pizza is the most popular food in the world, but why do you think it's the most popular food? What is it about pizza that makes it work for so many people and elicits such a response, an emotional response of activity? Okay, so it combines a couple of things. One is fresh baked bread. One of the things I do to tease professional bread bakers is I always say there's a way to find out if someone is a professional bread baker or a real person, and that real people love the smell and the taste of bread coming right out of the oven. Yeah. Meanwhile, a professional will say, no, you must let it cool first. And there's something to that because, of course, you want bread that will last long enough to go home. And I understand why they want that. Yeah. But man, the smell of fresh hot bread is awesome. Well,
Yeah.
you get that with pizza.
Yeah.
You also get cheese and some sweet and tart, both from tomatoes, and then often some meat and other veggies. It's close to a perfect meal. And it caught on, the place it caught on, I think it's important to realize it caught on in the United States, not in Italy.
Uh-huh.
It was a street food in Naples in the 19th century. It came to the United States and to South America when people started emigrating and leaving Naples. There's very strong but very different pizza cultures in Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo, for example.
Yeah.
But it was the US where it struck a nerve and it became super popular. During World War II, the New York Times ran a cooking thing with a recipe of here's how to make pizza. Now, Italy was actually our enemy in the war at that time.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't faze them a bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You didn't see a lot of Japanese food recipes or German recipes in the Times in that era.
It took a while to get to that point.
Pizza had already been adopted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it also helps that pizza wound up mutating a bit wherever it went. And so you develop lots of local styles. The first fast food chain in the United States was pizza. It was not hamburgers. It was not fried chicken. It was no other kind of American food. Shakey's had the first franchised thing in 1953.
Amazing. And most people don't know that. Yeah.
So it's something that struck a huge chord in the US.
Yeah.
And if that had not happened, I think pizza would be a very small phenomenon that came from Naples.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I say that, some people say, no, people would have discovered it. And then I say, okay, tell me about pizza fritta. Because in Naples, they have this thing called pizza fritta. It's basically a calzone, which is a pizza turnover. You dress it just like a pizza, but on half. You fold it over, and then you thump and seal the edges, and you deep fry it.
Yeah.
Americans love deep fried food. Americans love pizza. So surely we all eat deep fried pizza, right?
You would think.
We don't. And no one has been able to explain why that occurred, apart from that original pizza that got going was a baked pizza. And I don't think there's any rational reason that you would say that, except if you look around Italy, almost every region of Italy has some very interesting, very different kind of a food that's made nowhere else that never got out. And the same thing is true for many pizza-like things in other areas. So in southern Germany, northern France, in the Alsace, there's something called Flammkuchen, or tart flambe.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes, it's pizza.
Yes.
Right? It's a bread dough. On that, you put cheese and some red onions.
And it's wonderful.
It went nowhere. Okay? It no matter where you and I were in the United States, if I said, Peter, let's go out for pizza tonight, we totally could.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I said, let's go out for Flammkuchen.
Yeah, I know. I'd say we got to get on an airplane.
And maybe not even then. We better call ahead.
But you know what? I believe, and I'm not going to make a prediction right here, that tart flambe, Flammkuchen is going to be a thing. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
It will.
It's on the verge of tipping over, I think.
So one of the things that to sort of jump at it in a different way, The pizza world is very funny because on one hand, it shares with Italian cuisine this somewhat misplaced mania for authenticity in history.
Yeah.
At the same time, people want to do something new. And so you have this funny things like Roman style pizza. And I say it's funny because we have traced at least 4 totally different types of pizza that all swear they're Roman style. And the oldest one of these dates from about 1991. Okay, so this is not some ancient tradition. Why does Roman style pizza appeal to someone? Well, if you're opening up a new pizzeria, it's great to be able to differentiate your product so it's not exactly like everybody else's.
Right.
Yet at the same time, it's scary for people to do something that's totally unique. So instead they say, we'll do Roman style.
Yeah. Yeah.
Depending on which Roman style there's 4 different ones.
That's it. And we've seen them at the Pizza Expo. You see all these different booths and they all say Roman style pizza and they're all very different from each other.
Or you find people, when we tried to cover as many styles of pizza as we could in the book.
And there's a lot of styles that you covered for sure.
But there's always new ones, largely because someone said, well, you don't have Rocky Mountain pizza. What's Rocky Mountain style pizza? Well, we traced it to one pizzeria. Now that one pizzeria, okay, to be fair, I think they have 3 branches, but that to me, that's not a regional style if one place has it.
It would like to be.
Well, no, it's a wannabe. It's totally a wannabe.
Someday would want to be like Old Forge is another example you pointed to as it's one little town in Pennsylvania, but it did somehow brand itself, right?
Well, they have the most marketing chutzpah of anyone in the pizza world,
right.
Because they proclaim themselves the pizza capital of the world.
Yeah, that takes a little chutzpah for sure.
And it's a town of 7,000 people that has 7 pizzerias, all of which make an effectively identical pizza.
Yeah.
Why would you need 7 pizzerias doing effectively the same thing?
Because you're the capital.
But then the style of the pizza is so strange. It's like I would imagine pizza at a middle school cafeteria. It's made on a white bread kind of a crust that's bar baked.
Yeah.
So it's a doughy white bread crust, maybe a 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick.
So you were underwhelmed by the Old Forge.
Okay, no. Here's the cheese they use.
Yeah.
Velveeta or American cheese.
Amazing.
Now, these people are all of Italian descent. And you have to say, what possessed them to use American cheese?
Yeah.
I sort of asked, and they said, well, it melts real good.
It's like that happened to me with Philly when I go back to Philly and I see the cheesesteaks that are made with Velveeta too. I feel like I would love to keep talking about this, but we're running out of time. So I want to just kind of, and number one, let all of our listeners know, first of all, the book is out. It's there's in each volume covers a different thing. There's the history volume, there's the techniques volume, and then there's a zillion recipes. And one of the things I noticed about the recipes that's so cool is that you've got all the traditional sort of versions of pizza that we know about, but you've got a great creative team. You've got a creative director in Francisco Magoya, who you are constantly pushing the envelope on how to do this. So you're bringing, again, your passion for science and craft together to show people not only how to do it the old school way, but where it could go in the future. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Because look, there's no reason for us to think that pizza has to be limited to, tomatoes and mozzarella cheese. As much as I love those things,
yeah, right.
there are so many ingredients that I have had that truly great, talented pizzolos have put on the pizza that just blow my mind. And I think that has to be a good part of the pizza experience is people trying to, and that's not the same as a phenomenon I call putting weird shit on a pizza.
Right.
You can always put weird stuff on.
Yeah.
The question is, does it really hang together? Does it have a compelling flavor and texture profile? And it can. And I think that really that's how pizza, certainly that's how the small production artisanal pizza, whether it's at home or in a small pizzeria, that's the direction it should go, is towards creativity and quality.
Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this, for bringing your love and passion and resources to create a whole new publishing, genre of modernist cuisine books, bread, pizza, and I know coming down the road there will be more. You mentioned recently that you may be approaching pastry as another category. So, Nathan Myhrvold, thank you so much for joining us today, for being a part of this, and for bringing out Modernist Pizza. And folks, you track it down, either get it through Amazon, you can go to modernistcuisine.com and order direct from them. And we'll look forward to hearing more as you forge into new frontiers. And thanks again, Nathan.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
All right, we'll see you later. And thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you at the next time. Pizza Quest is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org, and connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a non-profit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, and more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Thanks for listening.